I think there's a little bit of a myth associated with PK boosters. I think people overutilize phosphorus without understanding exactly how it's going to get metabolized in the plants. And the important thing to remember is that most phosphorus in the, well, maybe not most, but let's say half of the phosphorus roughly that you apply to your plants is going to get recycled in the plant. It's not going to just get sunk into some, like calcium, for example, gets sunk into a cell wall. It kind of hangs out there and it doesn't really interact with the rest of the plant once it's been deposited. So plants naturally have a very high appetite for calcium. They can take up monster quantities of it because they know there's a terminal sink. They can just shove it in a cell wall and they don't have to deal with it. So if they get a little bit more than what they actually need, it's perfectly fine because they can always find a place to, put it into and make a new cell wall out of. But for phosphorus, because it's primarily recycled in plants, or it becomes a constituent of membranes, which are also more or less like fixed. They don't regenerate, or they don't require as much replenishment like calcium in cell walls does. This being the case means that the optimum concentration of phosphorus to expose your plants to is actually a lot lower than a lot of growers think. And I think according to the research articles that have been put out there, most plants will do well with about 30 to 50 ppms of elemental phosphorus. What you see on the labels is actually not elemental phosphorus. It's phosphorus expressed as P2O5. So there's a little bit of a conversion factor. How do you go from P to P2O5? There's a number you multiply it by. I think it's like 0.4364 or something like that. But, quick Google search for those of you who are interested. Just type in conversion factor P to P2O5. Do that, and then you'll find a calculator online that will allow you to convert it. But basically, 30 to 50 ppms is kind of the sweet spot for most plants. And to give you guys some context, in the vegetative stage of growth, where your plants are taking in a large concentration of nitrogen, you can feed upwards of 150, maybe closer to 200 parts per million of nitrogen. Compare that with 30 to 50 of phosphorus. Potassium, you can feed in some cases, I've seen, in excess of 400 parts per million, probably closer to 500 parts per million. Compare that with 30 to 50 of phosphorus. And then same thing with calcium. Calcium can be fed in massive concentrations, 200 plus ppms, no problem. And again, phosphorus clocks in 30 to 50. So in a lot of cases, I think when adding too much of a PK booster into the soil, really what you're doing is encouraging the tie-up between the phosphorus that's needed in low concentrations and the calcium that's needed in high concentrations. And this is why during the mid to late stages of bloom, plants tend to slow down. They get yellow. The disease pressures start to creep in, things like molds and mildews, botrytis. These things start to become disease pressures for plants, not because of anything to do with phosphorus directly, but rather a lack of calcium that's caused by excess of phosphorus fertilization. It's also worth mentioning that because phosphorus doesn't have an actual sink for most plants, it does if you're growing for seed, right? If you grow some flowers out and you want those flowers to actually be pollinated and to develop a seed, the actual seed itself is a good sink for phosphorus. So you can, if you're growing for seed and you want good viability from those seeds, it makes sense in that context to do a little bit of a PK boost, particularly during the seed formation stage, because then the plants will take up the extra phosphorus and they'll actually sink it into the seed. But if you're growing just the flower and you don't want any seeds, the overall maximum for phosphorus is going to be much lower because, again, there's no seed and so there's no sink for the plant. This is an important consideration.
This clip is brought to you by Happy Hydro. For all your garden equipment needs, visit happyhydro.com, link is in the video description, and use the discount code MrGrowIt.